Hello to all kind and adequate people. Today will be the most complete dismantling of the most effective method of life extension and, most importantly, healthy lifespan. A method that surpasses all existing technologies today, and it is not some secret protocols, not miracle pills available to the powerful. And it is not even the result of a team of personal physicians that some people spend millions of dollars on every year. And you know what it is. The method is very simple. You have to eat 20% less than your daily requirement. Sounds too simple to be true. However, that is exactly what decades of experiments have shown. Back in the 1930s, researchers noticed that rats fed a third less than usual lived significantly longer than their well-fed relatives, and sometimes almost 50% longer. And since then, the effects of calorie restriction have been confirmed in a multitude of species. From yeast and worms, house and egg fish, and even monkeys, for example. In one study, rhesus macaques on a diet narrowed by 30% calories had fewer diseases of aging and lived longer than average. Some females live to be 30 years old, which is a very respectable age for these primates, and it corresponds to the human 90 plus years. And in one of the long-term experiments on rhesus macaques, there was a participant named Sherman. He was put on caloric restriction. The average age for monkeys is about 16 years, which for a macaque corresponds to human 50 years. And here is the amazing thing: Sherman lived for 43 years. For rhesus, that is an absolute record, the upper limit of the species' biological potential. To put it in human terms, that is like living to be 130 years old. And for comparison, ordinary rhesus macaques without restrictions live on average about 26 years, rarely more than 35 to 38 years at most. So Sherman not only vastly outperformed his relatives on a standard diet, but exceeded even the species ceiling. It is cases like this that show that calorie restriction does not just shift the statistics on the average hospital, but it allows individuals to realize their full resource of longevity, and it is not just about animals. The early data on humans is impressive too. In a recent 2-year study called CALERIE, groups of volunteers reduced their diet by about 15 to 20%, and the result is that they improved in important ways. Health decreased blood pressure, decreased levels of low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, that is bad cholesterol, so-called increased sensitivity to kinsurin, and moreover there are hints of slowing biological aging in blood tests. The rate of aging cells slightly decreased compared to people on a normal diet. It may not be directly demonstrated as lengthening lifespan, as people live too long to wait for the end result, but all markers point in the direction of extending healthy lifespan. And interestingly, long livers in real life almost never overeat. Take, for example, the inhabitants of the Japanese island of Okinawa, famous for the number of its centenarians. Their cultural rule, harahachibu, calls for getting up from the table only 80% full. Simply put, they deliberately eat less than they could. Many other communities with large numbers of long-lived people also share this trait: modest portions, moderation in eating, and rarely feeling heavy from overeating. Historically, our ancestors often lived with periods of abundance followed by periods of scarcity, and our bodies seem to have adapted to capitalize on this. By the way, I want to note from my own practical experience, as I work with patients in the field of life extension and prevention and make individual longevity programs for them. Of course, I constantly monitor all modern scientific data studies, works to apply them in practice. And so far, no drug, no supplement has shown such a powerful effect as a banal 20% reduction in caloric intake. And the main idea is that calorie restriction of about 20% of the daily norm is the most effective and proven to date way to prolong life, and it's healthy, period. And it surpasses the power of any badass cocktails of youth and even promising drugs against aging. And by the way, here is a very telling example. A lot of people know Brian Johnson is a multi-millionaire, one of the most famous anti-aging fans out there. And he keeps a strict regimen with a plant-based diet of about 2,000 kilocalories per Dalton Y and a narrow window with meals, under the constant supervision of a team of doctors, of course, and with all its resources, which is about $2 million a year for anti-aging. The core of the program remains the same. Moderate calorie restriction as a basic anti-aging tool. That is, even with a notionally unlimited budget. The bet is on simple physiology, not miracle pills. I have done very deep research in this area, have many years of experience in the practical application of this method, and want to share my knowledge with you. Let us understand how and why it works, what are the pitfalls, and how to apply this method with maximum benefit and minimum risk. The video is going to be long and detailed, and so for convenience there is a table of contents and you can go back and listen to the parts you think you need, and let us first understand what are the mechanisms of action, what happens in the body when you restrict calories. Why is moderate malnutrition so beneficial? And the fact is that when you reduce calories, special biological mechanisms of defense and repair are activated. So when you eat less, the body perceives it as a signal. Times are not easy, resources are scarce, we must not spend too much to protect what we have, and in response a whole cascade of processes is reorganized. The level of insulin and GF1, i.e. insulin like growth factor 1, decreases. By the way, insulin like growth factor 1 is a growth hormone mediator, and some anti-aging researchers include it in their list of aging markers. And I do too. These hormones are usually abundant with abundant nutrition and signal cells to grow, and multiplying energy is there. When calories are restricted, their concentrations drop, and with them the constant signals to grow drop. And this is important because high levels of insulin and insulin, like growth factor 1, are associated with aging and many age-related diseases. A decrease in these hormones shifts cells from growth mode to weight and save mode. The next factor is that the activity of the mTOR negative 1 pathway is depressed. This is a key regulator of some sort of nutrient sensor inside the cell. When food is plentiful, mTOR negative 1 is activated and triggers the synthesis programs of cell growth and reproduction. But if nutrients are scarce, mTOR negative 1 activity decreases, and the decrease in mTOR negative 1 is a green light for purification and repair processes. Cells increase autophagy, a self-cleansing mechanism in which the cell recycles and disposes of all damaged components, debris and defective proteins. You could say that the cell starts a general cleaning, getting rid of everything old and damaged, and this helps it to stay healthy longer. Longevity genes and defense ends are also activated. Studies show that calorie restriction increases the activity of special regulator proteins, such as sirtuins, and the enzyme AMPK sirtuins are called the guardians of youth. They protect the cell as genetic material from damage and repair damaged DNA, and they regulate metabolism, inflammation, and keep the mitochondria healthy. And AMPK, which is adenosine monophosphate, an ADPH-activated proteinase, is an energy starvation sensor enzyme. It senses that the cell is low on energy and switches metabolism from fat storage mode to burn and survive mode. Together, MP sirtuins and similar molecules reconfigure cellular metabolism, making it more economical and sharpened for self-renewal. The next factor is reduced oxidative stress. In a normal caloric diet, cells are constantly recycling large amounts of fuel, which leads to the formation of free radicals, aggressive molecules that damage DNA, proteins, and membranes. This is oxidative stress. It is simply the process of rust building up inside the body. And when calories are reduced, less fuel is burned, and as a consequence, less free radicals are produced, i.e. harmful exhausts. Moreover, the cell S protective antioxidant systems are turned on, and as a result, cells experience less oxidation damage, and the accumulation of age-related breakdowns is slowed. All of these mechanisms together create an environment in which aging slows down, and cells divide less often and wear out less. DNA is better repaired, debris is better disposed of, done more efficiently, and inflammation is also reduced. It is as if the body is going into a gentle mode of operation, extending its lifespan. Calorie restriction is not starving to death, it is important to clarify at once. We are not talking about total starvation, and not about eating to the point of exhaustion. Calorie restriction is a moderate reduction in the energy value of your diet without depriving yourself of vital nutrients. Roughly speaking, you get all the vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates you need, but you just eat about 20% less of your nominal value. A question may arise if you maintain a constant energy deficit. Sooner or later, the body will exhaust all its accumulations and die. After all, we have the law of conservation of energy. It can come from anywhere, and it can go anywhere. Yes, that is true. But the point is that the body does not continue to waste energy as if nothing happened. If the energy deficit is reasonable, the body simply turns on economy mode. Metabolism slows down, and the body tries to spend energy more efficiently. You may, for example, notice a slight drop in your basal body temperature. This is a typical sign that the metabolism has adjusted to a smaller calorie bonfire. The hormonal system is also readjusting. For example, the thyroid gland may decrease hormone production slightly, with the first hormone to decrease being the T3 hormone, which is the third from tyrannin. This is the active active form of thyroid hormone. And this, by the way, suggests that our body is rearranging itself so that it is not converting T4, the primary hormone, into T3. And for the record, the thyroid gland produces T4 hormone, but it is not active. And in the tissues, in the peripheral tissues, T4 is converted to the active form. And as the activation of T4 slows down and T3 becomes less, metabolism slows down. This slowdown, by the way, is considered to be one of the factors of longevity in calorie restriction. Many long livers have rather low levels of thyroid hormone activity, and their TTG levels are closer to the upper limit or slightly above normal. TE is a thyroid hormone. The pituitary secretes it to regulate thyroid function. Further, the stress hormone cortisol is not normally elevated. But whether there is, of course, starvation is not extreme. The body does not perceive this as starvation, and with that said, the feeling of hunger usually even dulls after some time on the new regimen. Many people who practice moderate calorie restriction note that there is no permanent ravenous hunger. The body adapts, and an interesting thing happens: the body learns to work at a lower speed. It begins to expend each calorie more carefully, just as a thrifty housewife in hard times reduces all unnecessary energy expenditure. For example, spontaneous motor activity decreases. You feel less like fidgeting idly, and that is fine. On a separate note, calorie restriction does not mean eating poorly. You continue to eat a variety of foods, just in slightly smaller quantities. It is very important, when restricting calories, to avoid protein, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. That is, by cutting calories, the quality of nutrition should even improve. You need food with a high nutrient density, so that with less food you can provide yourself with the essentials. We'll talk more in practice about how to do this. For now, let us look at a conservation and repair strategy instead of a growth strategy. The main premise around which the whole idea of calorie restriction is built is a shift in the body, a strategy in full-fledged satiated times. The body works on the principle of grow and multiply. Excess energy pushes cells to divide, the body to gain mass, high reproductive activity, and so on. Evolutionarily, in good years, it made sense for our ancestors to invest in the continuation of the species, in growth, in building up reserves. But when there comes a relative scarcity of food, the priorities, of course, change. The organism switches to the mode of living until better times. Biologically, this means that it is necessary to pause everything that is connected with rapid growth and reproduction, and to launch faster processes of preservation and repair of what is left. It is like the body is saying, now is not the time to grow, now is the time to survive and repair breakdowns to last as long as possible. And that is the trick we use to our benefit. As long as the body is in preservation mode, the rate of aging slows down. After all, aging is largely wear and tear and the accumulation of damage. And in preservation mode, wear and tear decreases and repair improves. Cells divide less, which means that telomeres, which are the protective end portions of chromosomes, spend less time and risk errors when dividing. Enabled autophagy removes potentially damaging broken proteins and organelles, preventing many diseases, e.g. the loss of the cell's ability to repair itself and its cells, example of neurodegeneration, or cancer-reduced growth factors, the same in insulin, like growth factor 1 and mTOR 1, mean that there is less stimulus for tumor cells to emerge and for tissue hypertrophy. The body shifts from a growth strategy to a wait and see strategy, and wait and see requires maintaining itself rather than burning out quickly. An analogy can be made. Imagine a car that can be driven at high speeds, pushing to the max, or it can be driven slowly and very gently. In the first case, the engine wears out faster and fuel is spent more actively, and the car ages faster. In the second, the resource of the engine is preserved for a longer mileage, and calorie restriction is the addition at reduced revolutions. The resource of the body is consumed more slowly, so the life expectancy increases. And let us understand the pros and cons of calorie restriction. Of course, this approach has huge pluses, but as always, there are also nuances that are very important to know about. Consider, let ESCO and others, pluses or why all this is necessary. First, it is the prolongation of life and health. In animal experiments with calorie restriction, animals live longer and, more importantly, stay healthy and active longer. They are less likely to develop tumors, diabetes, hypertension and kidney problems. And the list goes on. In humans, long-term data is hard to get, but indirect markers like the aforementioned calorie study show that the rate of aging is decreasing, risk and disease potentially too. Many scientists believe that humans can gain additional years of healthy life if calories are reasonably restricted. The next factor is improved metabolic performance. Almost immediately, moderate calorie reduction leads to weight loss, especially at the expense of fat mass. And that leads to improved body composition. Visceral fat goes away. That is the very fat that accumulates around internal organs, and that is linked to cardiovascular disease. The levels of glucose, endostasia, and insulin are reduced, meaning that insulin sensitivity is increased, and the risk of metabolic syndrome and diabetes falls. Blood pressure is normalized, it decreases on the background of even 10% weight loss. And blood lipidic indexes are also improved. That is, as a rule, falls cholesterol, lipoproteins, low density and triglycerides, and the level of so-called good cholesterol, lipoproteins and high density may even grow. Simply put, the heart and blood vessels breathe easier and the risks of heart attack and stroke are reduced. The next factor is that less chronic inflammation and oxidative stress and calorie restriction are associated with reduced levels of inflammatory factors in the blood, such as, for example, C-reactive protein and interleukins. Reduced oxidative stress also contributes to the fact that chronic microdamage in blood vessels, joints, and brains occurs less frequently. And systemic inflammation is now considered one of the leading causes of aging. Inflammation of aging or inflammation of aging is what it is also called. And calorie restriction mitigates this inflammation, and as a result, the biological clock ticks slower. The next factor is a possible improvement in brain function. There is limited data here, but there are observations that in animals, caloric restriction slows age-related cognitive decline and improves memory. My people have also noted that on an empty stomach, their heads work even clearer than when they refuel. And in principle, this makes sense, since evolutionarily a hungry brain has to think better to get food. Well, besides reducing inflammation and improving vascular health benefits the brain as well. So calorie restriction could potentially reduce the risks of non-regenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, although there is no direct evidence yet, but we await the results of human studies. The next factor is the saving of resources of the organism. No matter how strange it is to write it down as a plus, but it is a fact that the organism on limited calories works more economically, which means that it needs less resources to maintain itself. Tissue renewal is slower, but more qualitative, and even in terms of sensations, many people notice not a drop in energy. On the contrary, a greater stability of energy during the day. There are no sudden spikes in sugar, insulin, less postprandial. That is after eating sleepiness and you like to switch to a cleaner fuel. Of course, there is a flip side to this coin. And here are the cons and side effects of calorie restriction. Most importantly, E is the possible loss of muscle mass. When we cut calories, we lose weight not only at the expense of fat, but also partly at the expense of muscle. In order to survive, it is easier for the body to sacrifice expensive to maintain muscle tissues, and if you do not pay attention to it, you can notice that the strength can weaken, strength and endurance will decrease, especially in older people. Muscle loss is a big risk, and it is called sarcopenia. However, this disadvantage can be minimized. Adequate protein intake and strength training during calorie restriction can help preserve muscle. We'll come back to this, how to do it right, a little later. The next factor is the effect on bones. Rapid weight loss is often accompanied by a decrease in bone mineral density. Part of this problem is due to weight loss. A less heavy body puts less strain on the skeleton. Bones are unloaded and can gradually thin out. In addition, some hormonal changes, the same insulin, like growth factor 1, for example, can also reduce bone formation. In the long term, inappropriate calorie restriction without exercise, without physical activity, can increase the risk of osteoporosis. So again, parallel bone loading, fitness, walking and other exercise, plus adequate calcium and vitamin D are mandatory companions to any caloric restriction program. The next factor unpleasant is the decrease in thyroid hormone levels. We talked about this before, the fact that T3 is dropping. In principle, the decrease in thyroid hormones is part of the mechanism of life extension. That is, it contributes to slowing down the metabolism. But there is a subjective downside. A person may feel a lower body temperature, chilliness, weakness, some lethargy, and if the decrease in hormones of these strong large, and this is a normal adaptation. But some people may be uncomfortable, constantly freezing. Again, it is important not to overdo the deficiency, then these effects will be smooth, not sharp. The next unpleasant factor is the change in the reproductive system. The body feeling that there is a deficit of energy reduces the level of sex hormones. In women with sharply expressed restriction of calories, especially when the body weight decreases below a healthy level, the menstrual cycle can be disturbed up to amenorrhea, a complete cessation of menses. This is understandable. In starvation, pregnancy is undesirable. It is so at all times in men can slightly decrease the level of testosterone and decrease THON. Basically, fertility drops and signals. Now is not the time to procreate. If you are planning a pregnancy or are experiencing hormone issues, severe calorie restriction is not recommended. However, with a moderate approach within a healthy weight, these changes in hormones are usually not critical and are quite reversible. The next side of the coin, the immune system and tissue healing. Here is a subtle point. Skillful calorie restriction may even improve some immune indicators and lower the intensity of chronic inflammation, that is, make your immune system more balanced. But over-restriction definitely weakens immunity. If the body doesn't get enough to eat, it trivially lacks the resources to quickly produce immune cells or antibodies to fight infection. And it is known that people who are underweight are more likely to get infections and have more severe colds, as well as people who are overweight. And also at strong deficiency of nutrients, wounds heal worse, hair can fall out, skin deteriorates, and in the context of reasonable calorie restriction, these problems are tried to prevent, but there is always an edge, a little too much, and the body as defense systems suffer. The next point is psychological and social discomfort. Let's not forget that food is for many people a pleasure and a part of social life. Constantly tracking calories, deny yourself the usual portions for some. It is already stressful enough and reduces the quality of life. Perhaps breakdowns or, on the contrary, an overly fanatical attitude to food, which I often very much observe. But you have to be honest with yourself. Not everyone will suit the style of eating with a constant light deficit. It is important to find a balance so that you don't turn your concern for longevity into a neurosis. As you can see, the disadvantages are mainly manifested if you approach incorrectly or too sharply. But with a competent approach, the pluses far outweigh and most of the side effects are minimized. In my practice, I often implement calorie restrictions, but I do it very carefully and individually. We start with, in addition, we have to combine calorie reduction with optimal consumption of protein, vitamins and regular workouts, for which we also build an individual plan. Well, such an integrated approach allows you to get all the pros and minimize the cons, so that this approach works for the benefit of health and not inoperate. And the dangers of extremes, why moderation, protein balance and training are important. Since we are talking about the minuses, let us emphasize especially the extremes in calorie restriction are unacceptable. You don't have to think that if a 20% calorie deficit is good, then 50% will be great. Cutting calories too much, more than 30 to 40%, actually puts our body in a state of chronic hunger, more akin to anorexia, and causes more harm than good. What happens at excessive deficit? The body switches on emergency mode, the muscle tissue starts to be rapidly consumed for energy, and you do not just lose weight, but you lose strength. The heart muscle can be affected, and it is already dangerous for life. In severe fasting conditions, there are arrhythmias and even cardiac arrests. Immunity falls sharply, and it is difficult for a person to resist even the simplest infections. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies develop and anemia can also occur. And women almost inevitably lose their periods, which is fraught, osteoporosis and other hormonal problems. Diapsychological state with extreme diets leaves much to be desired. Apathy, depression and obsessive thoughts about food. In a word, our goal is to prolong active life, not to turn ourselves into an exhausted patient. The maximum effect of life extension is achieved precisely by moderate, long-term supported calorie restriction without exhaustion. So the important things here are: the first is the moderation of the deficit, 10 to 20% reduction of calories from the norm. This is the optimal corridor. It is enough to jumpstart beneficial mechanisms, but not so much that it deprives the body of fuel for important functions. It is not necessary to chase a large deficit, but to chase stability. Let it be better to have a slightly smaller deficit, but you will withstand it for years without breakdowns and harm. Point 2 is to balance your diet. When reducing calories, every calorie eaten counts. They must come calories from quality food, no empty fast food and sweets. These are luxuries for which there is no room in a limited calorie budget. The diet should cover all needs: proteins for muscles and enzymes, fats for hormones and cell membranes, carbohydrates for energy, and usually their share and cut back harder. But you should not completely remove carbohydrates from your diet, unless you are on a keto diet by choice. Vitamins, minerals, fiber, you need a sufficient amount of them. And washer, fruits, greens and nuts. And by the way, 1 calorie restriction increases the risk of vitamin B12, iron, calcium and vitamin D deficiency. So watch them especially carefully and may even need to fulfill them with supplements. The third point is to get enough protein. This is so important that it is worth saying separately. Protein is your best friend on a longevity diet. It helps keep muscles and bones and gives you a feeling of satiety, and contrary to myths, in moderate amounts will not interfere with anti-aging effects. The goal is not to gain huge muscles, but to keep what you have. Therefore, with a reduced diet, it even makes sense to increase the dose of protein. For example, it is not fatty meat, fish, eggs, dairy products. Legumes, you can protein shakes as needed. And studies show that a high-protein diet in the context of calorie reduction allows you to lose more fat and less muscle. So no hunger strikes on salad leaves together. Your 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per Dalton White daily. And by the way, the full set of essential amino acids can be obtained from vegetable proteins if they are properly combined. The fourth factor is physical activity, especially strength training. Nowhere without them. Calorie restriction and a sedentary lifestyle is a bad combination. The body will decide that it does not need muscles and will start eating them. Therefore, be sure to include strength training at least 3 to 4 times a week. With weights, your own weight, in general as you like, the main thing is to give the muscles a stimulus. This is literally a signal to our body. Hey, muscles are needed, not lighting them up is better to take care. In addition, exercise strengthens your bones, which also offsets the effects of dieting, and also sport improves sensitivity to insulin, raises your mood and helps you cope with stress. That CHU need to be on any food restriction. In addition to strength training, be sure to add aerobic exercise, i.e. cardio, for heart health. Running, cycling, swimming and walking, but you have to be careful here. You don't want to overexert yourself so that you don't give your body the added stress of overdoing it. And if you want to not just once tweak the diet and really slow down aging, age beautifully and prolong a healthy period of life without agonizing age-related diseases, act systematically. I help you build such a plan. Personally, nutrition, sleep, training, tests, and of course monitoring progress. We use not only calorie restriction and lifestyle, but also those supplements that have actually proven effective and have the potential to prevent aging. If counseling is not available right now, you have a practical alternative. My video course is How to Beat Aging, a practical guide. It is a concentrate of proven strategies with clear implementation steps. Links to the course in the description below the video. And in the first pinned comment, I explain more about how to optimally combine strength and cardio exercises in the previous video. Point 5, health monitoring. If you have already decided to seriously sit on a long term, calorie restriction will not be unreasonable to periodically check your health, take tests, general blood tests, biochemistry, especially we look at iron, ferritin, B vitamins, vitamin D and electrolytes. We also check thyroid hormones, in women sex hormones, men testosterone and luteinizing hormone. Also monitor weight and body composition, proportion of fat and muscle. Keep an eye on your health, chronic fatigue, severe sensitivity to cold deterioration skin, hair, frequent illnesses. These are telltale signs that the deficiency is too strong or your diet is unbalanced. It is better to conduct such a program under the supervision of a doctor who has experience in this particular industry, if you have the opportunity to do so. In general, balance is our everything. Calorie restriction will only benefit you in the context of overall healthy habits. And then you will get an invigorated, trim body working like a Swiss watch. not a haggard ascetic figure. Now let's break down the alternatives. Alternatives and trendy approaches are interval fasting, keto diet, supplements, and why calorie restriction is out of competition here too. In health and longevity, there are many strategies on the rumor right now. Interval fasting, ketogenic diet, all sorts of geroprotective supplements and drugs. Of course, the question arises, is it possible to get the same benefits without reducing calories on a daily basis? Well, let's briefly compare. For example, interval fasting is a regimen where you alternate periods of eating and fasting. Popular variations are the 16/8 method. All calories are in an 8-hour window and you go 16 hours without eating, or 5 to 2, 5 days a week of normal eating, 2 days of severe calorie restriction, or daily fasting once a week, and so on. In fact, interval fasting often results in a spontaneous reduction in total calories, simply because you physically have time to eat fewer meals. Also, long hours without eating turns on some of the same mechanisms. Insulin drops and sensitivity to nutrient cues increases. Interval fasting is really similar to calorie restriction in effects. Many people prefer it because it is easier for them to not eat for a while and then eat to their heart as content than it is to continually not finish each meal. In scientific studies, interval fasting shows improved metabolic performance, weight loss, sometimes even reduced inflammation, almost like classic calorie restriction. And for some people, interval fasting is a great way to discipline their eating regimen. However, it is important to realize if you are compensating for all the calories in a meal period and overeating, there will be no deficit and no long-term anti-aging effect either. Many interval fasting protocols end up still coming out with your average daily caloric intake going down, and it is important to say that interval fasting is just another form of calorie restriction. It is more flexible for some people. Someone combines the two approaches, cutting calories slightly and restricting on the eat button. It is a pretty workable scheme too, and an important plus interval fasting gives your stomach and intestines time to rest, and it can improve sugar regulation and the health of your gut microflora. Well, there is no direct evidence that intervals alone, without a general calorie reduction, prolongs life. On the contrary, more and more studies are showing that the effect of interval fasting is all about calorie restriction, not hunger intervals. Therefore, it is the total calorie reduction that remains the gold standard. Interval fasting is just a tool for how to achieve this calorie restriction more conveniently. With a caveat for some people, next is the ketogenic diet. This is a very low carbohydrate, high-fat diet that puts the body into a state of ketosis, where ketone bodies from fat become the main fuel. Keto diet is sometimes called a fasting mimic because it keeps insulin consistently low, like starvation, and modulates some similar pathways. For example, the mTOR 1 complex is slightly suppressed due to low carbohydrate intake, and ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate levels are increased, which itself can act as a signaling molecule to boost cellular defenses. People on a keto diet often lose weight and improve their tests such as sugar and triglycerides. This is partly because they involuntarily start eating less. Fatty foods satiate well, and dietary variety lower less spontaneous overeating. Yet keto is not a panacea for longevity. If on a keto diet you manage to eat as many calories as you used to, there will be no special life extension despite ketosis. Some animal studies have even shown that high-fat diets without calorie restriction can shorten life despite signs of improved metabolism. So calories still rule. As they say, a keto diet can be a calorie restriction option. If that is how you feel more comfortable cutting calories, you are welcome. But there are nuances. On strict ketosis, it is hard to get enough fiber, some vitamins, and the long-term effects on bone, vascular, and kidney health are still being researched, plus the danger of significantly increasing your risk of cardiovascular disease. All in all, the keto diet is more of an alternative eating regimen than a direct replacement for a caloric deficit. You can of course combine, for example, moderate calorie restriction plus a medium or low carbohydrate diet. So it is easier to lose weight and blood sugar. Well, now let's get into supplements and medications. There are these drugs, mimetics, and calorie restriction metabolizers. It would be very tempting to get all the benefits of dieting just by popping a pill and lying on the couch. Scientists have been looking for such substances for a long time. Some candidates are resveratrol, which is an antioxidant from vinaigrette, metformin, an old drug in diabetes, and rapamycin, which is an immunosuppressant, an inhibitor of the mTOR 1 complex. It is also a substance like NAD plus boosters, that is nicotinamide diboxide and NMN, to activate sirtuins and maintain metabolism. It is also physitin, curcumin, epigallocotinogalate and other polyphenols. The list goes on. There are more modern developments, peptides, garmatins and so on. Some of these actually mimic some of the effects of caloric restriction in animal experiments, extending the life of yeast, worms or mice and improving their health. For example, rapamycin, by directly inhibiting the mTOR 1 complex, extended the lives of mice, and metformin appears to slightly extend the life of diabetics. But none of these drugs achieved the same level of effectiveness as simple calorie restriction. Usually the life gain from these drugs is more modest, and there may be side effects, resveratrol for example, which was touted about 15 years ago as the elixir of life, has never really lived up to expectations. Metformin, when used by healthy people, is also not suitable for everyone. It can give stomach problems, reduce endurance in physical activity, and the effect on longevity has not yet been proven conclusively. Rapamycin is a serious drug with relative risks. It can be taken just for longevity. It is still an experimental subject that requires fine-tuning of doses. And the bottom line is that for 2025, calorie restriction remains the gold standard in the science of life extension. Everything new that comes along is compared exactly to it, we know for sure. It works at least in animals, and by many accounts in humans. This method has a clear biology proven over the years, and most importantly, it is free, available to everyone. Unlike the expensive latest drugs, of course we'll be waiting for breakthroughs. Suddenly invent a safe pill, which, as in a fairy tale, will give all the benefits of the diet without the diet itself. But so far there is no such thing, therefore it makes sense to use what already. Now we will give us a head start in healthy longevity. Adjust the diet. It is not necessary, by the way, immediately go into a severe deficit. Many people prefer to gently combine approaches, restrict calories a little bit, say, by 10 to 15% plus practicing interval, fasting several times a week, plus incorporate physical activity, plus watch your nutrients. All these measures are not mutually exclusive, but rather work synergistically, but it is controlling the amount you eat that serves as the foundation. Now, having sorted out the theory and evidence, let us move on to the most practical section. So how do you put calorie restriction into practice the right way? So the practical protocol is, how do you extend your life with 20% calorie restriction? First things first, who is suitable for such a regimen and who is not? In general, moderate calorie restriction is suitable for adults who want to improve health and reduce the risks of aging. It is especially useful if you are overweight or prone to high blood glucose levels and high blood pressure. This is where you kill two birds at once. You rejuvenate them and rejuvenate yourself. It is not recommended to intentionally reduce calories for children, teenagers. They need to grow. They are not up to restrictions. Pregnant nursing moms understandably cannot cut back on nutrition. This can harm the child. People with eating disorders, that is anorexia or bulimia in the anamnesis, is also contraindicated, so as not to provoke a relapse. If you have serious chronic diseases or you are over the age of 65 to 70, you should implement calorie restriction very carefully and preferably under medical supervision. In some cases, strong weight loss for the elderly may even be harmful, and here everything, as they say, individually. In general, the ideal option is a relatively mature person, 35 to 60 years old, perhaps overweight, who is ready to gradually and consciously change their diet for the sake of long-term health. Rule 2. How to properly reduce calories in the diet. Start by determining your daily calorie allowance, that is, how much you normally spend and eat to maintain your weight. This can be done roughly with formulas or by using fitness tracker apps. Let's say you get about 2,500 calories a day to maintain your weight. Our goal is to cut about 20%. In our example, 20% of 2,500 calories is 500 calories, so the target level would be about 2,000 per Dalton Y. This is already noticeable, but not extreme. And it is important not to take a step and immediately cut 500 calories tomorrow. It is better to go gradually. First, remove 200 to 300 calories a day. Now, on every product write calories, and it is not difficult to see on the internet how many calories in one piece of bread or in one potato. Choose what you can give up. For example, eat 100 grams less bread for the day, and this can be broken down into several meals. For example, do not finish 50 grams in the morning and at lunch. The body will almost not notice this difference. After a couple of weeks, you can reduce more. So in a month or two, you will get to your 20% deficit without shocking the system. Many people in general prefer not to be guided by numbers, but by feelings. This good old practice of getting up from the table, only 80% full, really works. And choose a pace at which you feel comfortable. Rule 3. What to cut calories with. The easiest way is to eliminate or greatly reduce refined carbohydrates and fatty calorie-dense foods. Sweets, baked goods, sugary drinks, fast food, fried foods, they are the first pain to give. They provide a lot of calories but little benefit. Also control portions of starchy foods. Big plates of pasta, mountains of rice, bread in large quantities, these can and should be reduced. Keep more vegetables in your diet. They provide bulk and satiety while minimizing calories. Don't be afraid of healthy fats. Vegetable oils, nuts, fish. They are necessary, but remember that fat is very caloric. So dose even healthy foods. Nuts not by handfuls, but by tablespoon. Oil not by half bottles, but by teaspoon. And so on. A good technique of keeping a food diary for at least a couple of weeks, write down everything you eat with approximate calories. And you'll be surprised where you can easily trim the excess. For example, suddenly it will turn out that juice in the morning or lattes in the afternoon is an extra 300 calories, which can be easily removed by replacing it with water and black coffee. The goal is to learn to recognize where the calories are hiding. Then cutting them down will stop being a torment and become a conscious choice. Point 4. You have to keep track of yourself and monitor your progress. Unlike express diets, calorie restriction is not a sprint, but a marathon. That is why regular monitoring of the key is important to make sure you are going in the right direction. First, watch your weight, but not fanatically. Ideally, weight should drop by half a pound a week. A drop that is too steep is a signal that the deficit is too large. Well, except that at first you lose weight due to water, but then no more than half a kilo, 1 kilogram per week. Also, if possible, keep track of your body composition. Either it is a special smart scale that shows you the percentage of fat, or just a centimeter tape, which you measure the waist. If your waist volume is decreasing, it means that you are losing fat. Most importantly, visceral fat, and you see, for example, that volume and cape are not going away. That is right. If you see strength numbers sagging dramatically or muscle plummeting, reconsider the protein you are consuming and make adjustments to your training. Also, listen to how you feel. Successful calorie restriction is when you generally feel normal. Cheerful in the morning, able to concentrate during the day, not constantly irritated by hunger, and your sleep is fine. Mild episodes of fatigue or hunger are acceptable, but they should not turn into a chronic condition. If you notice alarming symptoms, such as dizziness, constantly cold hands, feet, loss of menstruation, hair loss, insomnia, decreased lipid reactions, often and colds. Sudden mood swings, these are my points that the body is too in severe deficiency or suffers from a lack of some nutrients. In that case, adjust your nutrition. You can slightly increase calories. Well, for example, plus 200 kilocalories a day can eliminate all these problems. Diversify your diet or see a doctor to get tested. And it is not a bad idea to keep a health diary. Note what you eat, how you sleep, your energy level, your mood, and how your workouts are going. That way you'll see progress and be able to link cause and effect. For example, have a look at your energy levels, and you ate too few carbs the day before, or had too heavy, a deficit, a few days in a row. Or on the contrary, noted that you began to sleep better. Perhaps the body has adapted to the new regime, and your stress has decreased. Point 5. What to do during restrictions, key recommendations. The main points that ensure the success of calorie restriction we have already mentioned. But let us bring them together. Eat a lot of vegetables, greens, mushrooms, they are low calorie. But fill the stomach, provide vitamins, minerals and fiber. A salad before the main course is great to satisfy the first hunger. Emphasize protein at every meal. Eggs for breakfast, chicken, fish, tofu for lunch, cottage cheese or legumes for dinner. Plan your menu around protein. This will preserve muscle and provide satiety. A special warning to hyperabsorbers, that is, people whose low-density lipoprotein levels are highly dependent on dietary cholesterol. Such people are better to give up egg liquids and consume only egg white. Also drink water and not sweet drinks. Thirst is not to be confused with hunger. Fluid intake helps the metabolism disappear and slightly dulls the appetite. Green tea or herbal tea are also good companions for this. Get enough sleep. If you do not have enough sleep, it will be the enemy of your figure and healthy aging. Important regenerative processes take place during during sleep. If you sleep less than 7 hours regularly, weight loss will be worse and stress will be higher. So try to establish a sleep schedule. Next point, stay active, walk at every opportunity. Even an extra 2,000 to 3,000 steps a day will not only burn a couple dozen kilocalories, but will also improve your mood, reduce your appetite, and support your cardiovascular system. It is especially useful to walk immediately after eating. Next point, diet variety. Look for delicious low-calorie meals. Restriction does not mean monotony. Now full of recipes from pumpkin soup to baked fish with vegetables, smoothies, omelettes, greens. Incorporate creativity to make nutrition make you happy. The same zucchini or broccoli can be prepared a dozen ways. Find the ones that are to your liking, take supplements as needed. Even though the focus is on nutrition, it is still sometimes hard to get everything by eating, especially on a calorie deficit. And in consultation with your doctor, you can supplement with omega-3, vitamin D, vitamin B12, calcium, magnesium, those things that we often don't get enough of, and that will support your body, what not to do when restricting calories, key prohibitions. In order not to nullify all the benefits and not to harm yourself, avoid the following mistakes. First, do not throw yourself into extremes. We already talked about. But again, you should not starve yourself. You should not drastically cut your diet to minimums. For example, eating less than 1,200 calories a day for women or 1,500 calories for men. Without medical supervision, this can be dangerous. You don't need to go on long hunger strikes without preparation. Don't neglect protein and micronutrients. Do not cut calories at the expense of healthy foods by replacing them with empty foods. Some trying to save calories, skip meat, fish because they are caloric, but then they eat the cakes. It seems to fit into the calorie, but it is of no use. The quality of food is always more important than just the number of calories. Do not ignore the alarm signals of the body. If you feel bad, don't think it is just the way it is. ILL tolerated. Healthy longevity does not require chronic pain or suffering. Adjust your diet, seek help. It is better to slow your progress than to undermine your health. Well, don't forget your social life and psyche. Don't turn nutrition into a cult. You can and should remain flexible. Go to a holiday, eat a piece of cake on your birthday. From a one-time excess of calories, disaster will not happen. Just calmly return to your regimen the next day. Avoid feeling bina for eating. Stress is more harmful than a slice of opica. And remember, you are doing this for the long haul, which means you need to learn how to live life to the fullest without obsessing about food alone. Don't expect instant miracles. Calorie restriction works slowly, and it is a marathon. The first couple months may not provide any sense of rejuvenation at all. Most likely, you LL just feel almost the same as usual, only lighter by a couple pounds. But the main thing will happen imperceptibly inside you. Cells will be renewed, tests will improve. Be patient. The rewards will come over the years. When your peers begin to suffer from a bouquet of illnesses, you will find that you outpace them in health and energy. Longevity is a game of duty and gravitas, and in closing, we would like to emphasize, calorie restriction is not magic or a one-time lifestyle action. Its effectiveness is proven by science. Its mechanisms are clear, and with a reasonable approach, this method is able to give you additional years of active and healthy life. Of course, you should not perceive calorie restriction as a cure for all ills. Aging is a multifaceted process, and nutrition is only one of the facets. But when it comes to the single most powerful and affordable strategy for extending your body, S-resource, moderate, consistent malnutrition is the favorite. In the spirit of anti-aging best practices, start small, listen to your body, rely on the evidence of science, and maintain balance. Eat less, move more, sleep better, and the odds are high that not only will you live longer, but you maintain a clear mind, strong body, and quality of life into later life. This is their goal of extending a healthy lifespan, not just the number of years. Calorie restriction, when properly implemented, helps this goal to be achieved better than any method in existence today. Use it wisely and let your biological meter tick slower. And if you want to not just one time tweak your diet, but really slow down aging, age beautifully and prolong a healthy life without agonizing age. Related diseases act systematically. I help you build such a plan personally. Nutrition, sleep, training, tests, and of course, monitoring progress. We use not only calorie restriction and lifestyle, but also supplements that have actually proven effective and have anti-aging potential. If counseling is not available right now, you have a practical alternative. My video course is How to Beat Aging, a practical guide. It is a consultation concentrate of proven strategies with clear implementation steps. Links to the course in the description below the video, and in the first pinned comment, proven strategies with clear implementation steps. Links to the course in the description below the video, and in the first pinned comment.